Hi friends, thanks again for joining us for another session of Exploring the Kingdom, where we're taking a series of Jesus' teachings in the Sermon on the Mount and looking at how they impact and can help transform our lives in so many different ways. Last week we talked about this passage where Jesus was telling the disciples and the crowds that were gathered there listening to him in the Sermon on the Mount, unless your righteousness goes beyond the righteousness of the Pharisees and the scribes and the teachers of the law, you won't enter into the kingdom of heaven. In other words, unless our righteousness, our right living before God, goes beyond simple rule following and just not breaking any of the laws, we're not going to be able to experience the kind of kingdom life that Jesus is inviting us into and trying to help us understand here with his teachings in the Sermon on the Mount. That passage before the one that we'll deal with today in Matthew chapter 5, verses 21 and following, is a great setup because this week we're going to start a series of Jesus' teachings where he begins to follow this typical pattern and he starts to give these illustrations of basically saying, listen, I'm not here to get rid of the law, but I'm here to help you understand how to go deeper to the heart of the law. And so he's going to have this series of teachings. You have heard that it was said, and he'll talk about some Old Testament teaching, and then he'll say, but I say to you, and he'll just lay his own teaching right alongside of that. In this process, whether he's talking about murder or adultery or how to deal with enemies or how to keep your word or whatever, he doesn't get rid of any of these laws. Remember, he said, I haven't come to abolish the law, but he's laying his own interpretation and teaching alongside to try and get to the root of how to become the kinds of people who naturally bear the kind of fruit that doesn't break the law in the first place. How do we become the kind of people who on a heart level don't come anywhere near to breaking these kinds of laws because we're bearing a whole different kind of fruit in our lives? The first passage that we're going to deal with here in this section of you have heard that it was said, but I say to you, is a great illustration of this. He says in Matthew chapter 5, verse 21 and following, you have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not murder. And there we are, right? A teaching on the Sermon on the Mount, right? Or a teaching from the Ten Commandments, you shall not murder. And most of us would be like, well, great, I'm going to move on to the next one. I'm pretty sure that I'm not going to go and take somebody else's life. But Jesus says it's not just about that. How do we become the kinds of people who never start to walk down a road that even hypothetically could land at a place like that? You know, Cain didn't start out with his brother Abel with anger, murder. It started out with jealousy and contempt, and it was this winding road that ended up leading in a place like that. And so Jesus is saying, how do we become the kinds of people who never get there? So he says, you've heard it said, don't murder, and whoever murders will be liable to judgment. But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother or sister is liable to judgment. In fact, whoever insults his brother or sister will be liable to the council, and whoever says, you fool, will be liable to the hell of fire. So Jesus takes this common teaching, don't murder, and he says, yeah, obviously, don't do that, but it's more than that. If you find yourself in a place where anger is stirring up in your heart, let's be careful right there. If it starts to get up to the point where you find yourself insulting someone else or even calling names, listen, we've got to head this off at the pass right there as people who are living in kingdom life. And Jesus does this masterful, beautiful job of finding a way to put his finger right on the heart level issue that we have to learn to deal with as his people, as his followers, in order to become the kinds of people who naturally will bear the fruit that God desires in our life. So anger, man, listen, I'm talking to you as a person today who has dealt with a life of learning how to navigate that emotion. And let me just start off right here saying let's be honest about what anger is. It's an emotion. It's not good or bad. It's not right or wrong. There's nothing about becoming angry in your life that you or I need to feel guilty about. It's just an emotion, a human, normal emotion. Anger comes into our life when, I think the best way to understand it is when our will gets thwarted. When we have an idea of what ought to happen in our life or in the world or on our calendar or in our schedule, and for whatever reason, it could be a circumstance or a situation or someone else's will or someone else's action that jumps in the way of our will being able to play itself out. And sometimes that could be my own will. Sometimes that could be my understanding of the will of God that I want to see played out in the world. And so there's all sorts of ways that this can play itself out. But it really is just when something stands in the way of our will. And this could be something as simple as like getting sick, right? And so I'm angry about that because I'm not healthy and I can't go through life as normal. And so that would be a circumstance or a situation. Or something about your schedule being interrupted by kids or your roommate or your spouse or your schoolwork, a professor or something that's causing life difficult for you. And we get angry about that or whatever. And there's nothing wrong with that emotion. But you and I know that we live in a world where we are shown time and time again, example after example, and illustration after illustration of ways to take the emotion of anger and act out on it in ways that feed into the fires of destruction and discord and hatred in the world that we live in. Man, we're in the middle of a political season where that's just like status quo, like your side and my side, and we'll figure out how to put wood on the fire here and gas on the fire here, and everybody's fanning the flames because the sides that are running the shows know that fear and anger are emotions that are primal in our lives, and it's very easy for those primal emotions to be harnessed in ways that will destroy the other party or the other side. We see this in people who have competing visions for the world and how our communities ought to be structured and all the different debates and conversations that are going on like that. If we could just make an enemy of someone else and harness the anger into energy that destroys the other side, that then we can continue on with our will, right? We even see this, unfortunately, friends, in the church. I've seen so many times the activity of brothers and sisters within the people of God acting out on anger. And insults get thrown out a lot of times over social media, and names get called, and people get dragged through mud in ways that destroy really the credibility and witness of the church. Because in those kinds of moments, we haven't chosen to deal with our anger in appropriate and helpful and holy ways. So when we find that anger comes into our life, what do we do with it? Well, Jesus says, if you find yourself angry with someone else or insulting someone else or calling someone else fool, listen, those are warning signs, red flags, like the light ought to be going off in your mind. This is the moment that we have to go and deal with the hard issue. He goes on and says, so listen, if you're offering your gift at the altar, in other words, if you're doing something as important as devotion in religious activity to God and showing God your love by bringing God a gift at the altar, in that moment, if you remember that there's something between you and a brother or sister. He says, if you remember there that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. Go be reconciled with your brother or sister and then come and offer your gift. Guys, do you realize how revolutionary this kind of a teaching is? Jesus says, if you're in the middle of your religious devotion to God, your worship itself, your activity of giving offerings to God, and in that moment recognize that there's something between you and a brother or sister that's causing anger or frustration in your life, stop your religious activity and go make it right. Listen, I love the emphasis that Jesus puts on it here too. He recognizes that every one of us, for the most part, has something that we can probably do to bring peace to a situation. A lot of times this is coming into it with a spirit of humility. Very rarely do relationships break down only 100% from one side. This happens. There are times when people sin against us and cause us anger, and these are issues that Jesus is going to deal with in some other ways. But in this situation, Jesus is like, listen, if there's anything at all that you can do to bring peace to a situation, to be reconciled, to make an issue or a situation right, don't carry on with your religious activity, as important as that is. Stop it there, leave it, go be reconciled, and then come back and offer your gift. Jesus recognizes this history of God's people that have always wrestled and struggled with maintaining the letter of the law while letting these deeper issues of the heart run unchecked to the point where we end up breaking the laws. Jesus knows the history of the empty worship as the people of God have gone out and lived in ways that aren't faithful witnesses to the character of God. And we, in every generation, are in danger of the same kind of activity if we don't allow the Spirit of God to work on these heart levels in our own lives first. Paul says to us in Ephesians chapter 4, verse 26 and 27, in your anger, do not sin. Again, anger is what it is, but when we find ourselves in this emotion, don't let it extend into activity that gets pointed into the world that causes harm to someone else out of a motivation of anger. He says, don't let the sun go down on your anger. Don't waste time in dealing with this anger. Don't nurse a grudge. Don't carry around hatred in our heart for days on end. Don't just allow it to turn into some passive-aggressive thing or hope that it goes away. Deal with it in the moment before it has a chance to grow into something else, because in our anger, it's easy to allow the devil to get a foothold. So he says in verse 27, don't let the devil get a foothold. Don't allow anger to become something in your life. I'm trying to do this in my own life, where it leads us to acting out in anger. Dallas Willard, wonderful theologian and writer, says that there's nothing that can be done in anger that cannot better be done without it. Friends, this is one of those teachings that as we learn to pray the prayer, not my will be done, but yours, anger gets right to the heart of that, right? When our anger gets interrupted or challenged or thwarted, these are opportunities for us to remember the calling that we have on our lives as followers of Jesus to lay down our own will. And so maybe we can even see every one of these places when our will gets thwarted in some of these ways in the world or in our life, that these might just be opportunities to practice the beginning part of this prayer, not my will be done, so that we are an open vessel to be able to invite the will of God to be done in our own lives. Today, as you reflect personally or with your own groups that you're there with and begin to have conversations around these issues, I'd love for you to think about what kinds of things is it that make you angry? Are there practices that you find yourself in on a regular basis where the actions that you're doing are done out of anger and those need to be addressed? Are there some grudges that you're carrying around? Is there some unresolved anger? Is there something between you and a brother or sister, especially a brother or sister in Christ, that you might have the ability to find a way to make peace in. Friends, this is right at the heart and beginning of the teaching that Jesus is going to do here in the Sermon on the Mount. Before we can ever get to the weightier matters of how to love an enemy, we've got to be able to allow the Spirit to work on us at this point. I believe that Jesus invites us into a better way here. And so today, may your will be laid aside. When anger rises up, may you offer it up to God and allow the Spirit to teach you how to transform it into actions of love and peacemaking and goodwill towards others that bring life into our world and not out of it. May the Lord bless you as you become the kind of people who give witness to His character on earth. Blessings, friends. Have a great day.